Hello, guys. How's it going?
Hi.
Hi, how are you, Jacqueline? How are
Good.
you, Claire?
Really good.
Good. We are all back from our 3 week long August publication break. I assume you all had a wonderful time. I have heard snippets already, but any highlights that you all want to share?
We went to Maine, which is familiar territory for you, but it was first time for my family. So we drove up there in our little Fiat and we parked it and took a shuttle to a ferry and a ferry to an island and had a really wonderful time. Didn't get to do as much as I wanted, but still saw a satisfying amount of wildlife and yeah, ate a lot of good food. So,
What wildlife did you
well, I
see?
really wanted to go whale watching or puffin watching or any of those other excursions that you can do from Portland, but we just couldn't fit it in. I did see just a ton of pelicans and loons, and we caught a bunch of hermit crabs and regular crabs, and probably more that I'm forgetting. But yeah, just it felt like very unlike the beaches I'm used to going to, the New Jersey beaches. They were so wild, and there's always something under a rock. It was really fun for us. Yeah,
Yep. Being familiar with both New Jersey beaches and Maine
right.
beaches at this point, I can definitely
Very different.
confirm.
Yeah,
Yeah, different. And both of those very different from like Florida
yeah.
beaches.
Never been there
Just
either, so can't compare.
wow. Well,
And as journalists, of course, we are superbly trained
Mhm.
to look under
Mhm.
rocks.
Well, and I
true.
started out more in environmental journalism, so I'm especially trained to look under rocks
Well,
and logs, and I do a lot, even when I'm not on the clock.
I'll have to pick your brain, Claire, because went on a run yesterday and I saw this crazy orange, bright orange mushroom but they were like little dots everywhere. I'm gonna have to ask you about it and show you pictures because,
I can tell you what it is.
yeah, bright orange, bright orange.
Oh, no, I can give you the Russian name for it, which is muhamor, which is actually, I think, also an English name for it. And I do believe that I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but that might be hallucinogenic and it's
Mm.
used that way.
Wow.
Might
All
also
right.
kill you, so I have no idea.
Yeah.
As mushrooms go, seems to be the way. I'll have to do
And
more research.
and
Maybe go back.
in Vermont, I was, which is where I was. So we were all in New England.
Hmm.
It's really interesting. Uh, I was trying to pick mushrooms, as I always do, and I've done this for decades, and many more than I care to admit. My mother taught me when I was 6 or 7, so I'm pretty good in North Woods. And this is the first time in Vermont that there were almost no mushrooms.
Really? Too cold?
Why is that?
I have no idea. It was a very dry summer.
Hmm.
You need a lot of water,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so for moisture and for the mushrooms. But yeah,
Hmm.
couldn't find any mushrooms.
Bummer.
None, not any at all. There's
Almost none.
wow.
I had I had enough to one time to sort of save up to make a mushroom and barley soup, but I supplemented it with dry mushrooms from last year.
Okay.
Wow.
Never seen this before. I
Yeah.
mean, places where there were always more mushrooms, tons of mushrooms, there weren't any.
And
Yeah.
it's not a case
That's
of over
wild.
foraging. Like no one's in those woods. I'm
I've
not sure.
never seen
Yeah.
anyone who had been in those
Hmm.
woods.
That's strange.
So it's not, well, lots of people in those woods, not lots, some people in those woods, but most of them have no idea what kind of a mushroom is going to kill you and what kind of a mushroom
Yeah.
will not.
Gotcha.
Yes. So they should not be foraging, though they might be anyway.
What about you, Jacqueline? What did you do? I don't think I've had a chance to
Uh,
catch up with you yet.
yeah, I really did not much of anything. I read a lot and laid in my house in Portland, which is still new for me because right after we moved in, we went to Peru. So now it's like almost fully decorated and it just has a lot of like outdoor, like we have a porch and like a little deck thing. So I literally just laid in the sun for like most of the month. So
Nice.
it was very needed. It was like a nervous system reset after
Yeah.
after the crazy year. And then, as a transition anyway, we came back to a doozy of a week. I think for me, I was thinking back to a week that was crazier than last week, and I think it was only the marathon ODAC can compare to what happened last week. That was insane.
Yeah.
So I'll take us through the headlines, but there are a lot of them, so bear with me. It was really what drove the craziness was that it was a shortened week, obviously, and then also there were two pretty major events happening on Thursday morning. And I'm sure most listeners would know, but we publish on Friday morning. So we had a lot of copy to write and a lot of stuff to digest and get refamiliarized with as after the break to write and publish on Friday within like 12 hours. So it was a sprint instead of a marathon this time. But yeah, so the two major events were the NCAB meeting, the National Cancer Advisory Board meeting. It was the second one since Trump was inaugurated, and it had NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya as a speaker, which is apparently an incredibly rare event to have the NIH director speak and importantly hold an open Q&A session at this event. So that was our lead story, was focused in on that Q&A mostly, and sort of almost like a roundup of recent policy changes at NIH through that Q&A. So focused obviously on oncology. Our second story was about the House spending bill that was reported out last week. It was a huge signal for the oncology community and for NIH more broadly that the House is sort of on track to join the Senate in rejecting the President Trump's budget proposal that would cut NIH by $18 billion. So both the Senate and the House bills give modest increases to both NIH and NCI. We also reported on NCI Acting Director Douglas Lowey's remarks at the NCAB meeting, which included some important sort of how the House, well, not even just the House, but how the congressional budget news is affecting NCI and how the Institute plans to prepare for forthcoming news events from Congress. And finally, Claire wrote a story about the RFK or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Hearing before the Senate Finance Committee. Just in case listeners aren't aware, that is the HHS secretary. And that was a really highly charged event. I will let Claire talk about that later in the podcast. But that is definitely a juicy story to read when you have a chance. And then, yeah, Sarah, our fellow, because we were all so jam-packed, she took on a lot of the cancer policy stories, which is really, more than we would normally expect for a fellow. And she really took it in stride. She also was she also produced the backlog of the month of briefs that we had missed. So somehow she managed to get I don't even know how to put it in words, how much work she got done. So really just an incredible team effort last week to get everything done. And we didn't even have that late of a Friday. So we made it work. And then, yeah, the last thing I'll mention is that one of our stories, we actually published it in our issue, was a special report from the August break featuring Knight Cancer, featuring Brian Drucker of Knight Cancer Institute, who returned to his executive role as president of the new Knight Cancer Group. So you can definitely check that out. That is also a podcast as well. So you can find that on Spotify or in our issue from last week. But yeah, so that's a lot. Obviously, there's more to talk about. Like I said, cancer policy was packed. We had it in the archives, and the briefs were huge as well. But yeah, if we want to dive into probably some more of the details, all four of our main stories last week were really worth diving into. So I would probably start with story one, just to keep it chronological.
I would actually suggest that we start with story two, because I think that's really fundamental. I generally keep my mouth shut on these choices, but I think story two is where things are crucial. I think it's important to talk about Congress. You and I wrote that story, and mostly you. It's what does it say about Congress?
Yeah, I mean, I think the major thing is, that bill is sort of getting mixed reviews from various communities, right? Take out oncology, take out even biomedical research. There's lots in that bill, obviously. But for our readers and our particular focus, for NIH and NCI, it's a pretty great news, or pretty good news, I guess I would say more conservatively, because, like I said, it sort of signals that the House is joining the Senate in rejecting Trump's major cuts. Specifically, I can give you the numbers. Basically, it includes a $46.9 billion budget for NIH's base, and which represents a 99 million or 0.2% increase over FY25 levels. And NCI specifically would receive 7.3 billion, which is a boost of 48 million or 0.7% above FY25 levels. So I think I've heard some people say that, with inflation, that's almost kind of like flat funding. It's nothing crazy, but again, compared to what we were fearing when we saw the president's budget proposal, this, like the Senate bill, is great news. It's wonderful.
Yeah, but and it's not just that. That bill, the president's budget request, proposed consolidating a bunch of institutes and cutting a bunch of them out, completely destroying them. And here is, NCI is getting the largest increase of them all. Mm-hmm. The institutes are being kept as they are, and by the way, a couple of years ago, a year ago actually, the House Energy and Commerce suggested a blueprint where they really originated the idea of consolidating a bunch of institutes. Also, wouldn't you say that there is something really interesting with the fact that that the Office of Minority Health?
Yeah, that stays flat, which I kind of expected it to be cut, considering. And yeah, that stays flat. That's still there. The Make America Healthy Again initiative did get $100 million, but it did not, or the bill did not actually establish the Administration for a Healthy America, which was in the Trump's proposed budget. The Fogarty International Center is still there. The National Institutes for Nursing Research, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. All these were slated to be cut in the Trump proposal, but are still there. Again, albeit flat funding, but they're still there in the House spending bill. Yeah, I mean, from what I could see, the main cuts on the NIH or HHS side are for ARPA-H, the Advanced Research Project Agency for Health, which got a $555 million cut, which was 37%. So that seems to be a big chunk of where they sort of got this spending money. The bill also eliminated the funding for Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, although I don't actually, off the top of my head right now, know how much that was, like the dollar amount. But yeah, it's surprising all around. There's not too much. I mean, I will say, and this sort of ties into Claire's story, the bill does include a what is it? A 7.4 billion. It includes 7.4 billion for CDC, which is a cut of 1.7 billion below 2025 level, which is sort of its whole other news beat, I would say, CDC specifically. And that's obviously receiving a lot of not so great reviews and feedback from the community as well.
So it's interesting because the lobbying that occurred was aimed, I believe, at moderate Republicans in the House and Senate, and it seems to have worked. It's really probably an unprecedented lobbying campaign, or at least of unprecedented effectiveness.
Yeah.
Lots of people were working together on this, and there was strategic thinking happening.
Yeah.
Which just kind of creates an interesting thing because Democrats aren't really happy about the House bill.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of a war between Republicans.
Yeah.
It's a new kind of situation of. But should we talk about CDC, or should we talk about or HHS, or should we talk about the Kennedy hearing, or should we go to NCAB?
Lots
You
of options.
decide. I've decided on one. You decide on the other.
I would say, why don't we take the CDC path to RFK? That would be my my choice if you want to talk a little bit about it, Claire.
Thursday morning, Kennedy appeared before the Senate Finance Committee for the first time since May, I believe, meaning this was the first time that senators had the opportunity to question him about the upheaval and chaos at CDC. He has, effectively fired and replaced the Vaccine Advisory Committee. Susan Manarez's ouster happened while we were on break, followed by 3 other top CDC folks. So there's a lot of feelings. It was probably one of the longest and most contentious. I've sat through, I think, all of the Senate and House hearings since the beginning of the year, doing the Lord's work. And I think this was the longest and most stressful, across party lines. Everyone had a bone to pick with Kennedy, it seemed, at this particular hearing. And vaccines, as they usually do with him, are the focal point. There were some very angry Republicans, Bill Cassidy among them, who was his deciding vote in his confirmation, Kennedy's deciding vote, who had kind of been on the fence and hesitant to cast that vote because of Kennedy's stance on vaccines. And Kennedy, I guess, on and off camera, reassured him that he would not make it more difficult for people to take vaccines. Cassidy's take is that commitment has not been upheld, and that it is indeed harder for a lot of people to get the COVID vaccine in particular. And he's worried it's going to get harder. He gave, submitted documents showing that he has proof of that happening. What else? John Barrasso of Wyoming, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, both Republican senators, were also pretty upset. And kind of challenging Kennedy on his commitments and his inconsistencies on vaccines. So right now it's kind of a wait and see. Is Trump going to let this go on? His response to reporters, and I believe in the Oval Office, and then again at a dinner, were that he didn't watch the hearing, that he'd heard a lot about it, and that, Kennedy's position is kind of a tough stance on vaccines. His quote was, "You have some vaccines that are so incredible, and I think that you have to be very careful when you say that some people don't have to be vaccinated," which is interesting because one of the talking points that kept coming up was Operation Warp Speed, which Trump was obviously behind and a big part of, and kind of the senators challenging Kennedy on whether or not Trump deserves a Nobel Prize for Operation Warp Speed. And he said that he did believe he deserves a Nobel Prize. So it was kind of this catch-22. So if you believe he deserves a Nobel Prize, but you've also said that the COVID-19 vaccine is the deadliest vaccine of all time, what is the truth? What do you really believe? So, and Kennedy, the whole time kind of in attack mode. It was contentious. So.
Yeah, it was a brawl.
What?
It was covering a brawl. It's interesting that your beats, 2 of them are Vinay Prasad and RFK Jr.
I didn't ask for this life. It happened to me.
Well, I'm glad you're leading this life.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. It's definitely kind of a fun trajectory to watch. I feel very invested in these people's lives. So Vinay is back too. I don't know if people saw that, but he's back.
Yeah, you wrote that
but
story.
That story as well. It's in cancer policy.
Yeah. So more brawls to come. We'll keep you we'll keep you entertained with this. But Kennedy, I think, is there's more to be seen with Kennedy. It's not over. I just don't feel like it's. I don't know. I would not bet more than $5 on him being here next year.
Yeah.
I might bet $3.
It feels like a boiling point. Maybe a boiling point, or maybe the boiling point has passed and now the pot is boiling over a little bit. That's what it seems like. That's what it felt like. I'm not a political analyst, but intuitively, that's what it felt like.
That's all we've got is our intuition.
Yeah.
So, maybe we should talk about now the story, the lead story, because to me the most interesting thing was what Bhattacharya said in response to question from one of the NCAB members, Dr. Boxer of UCLA. He said, nope, it's not going to happen. The 40% cut's not happening.
Yeah.
That to me was a highlight, but it's not going to happen.
Yes.
What worries you guys the most about what is happening? Would they actually spend the money the way Congress intends it, or spend it on some research that NIH doesn't necessarily want? What's going to be your guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I don't know if I guess I could say I'm a little concerned. Again, not a political analyst and still a very young reporter in this field, but something that sort of made the hair on the back of my neck stand up a little bit is the sort of next level of grant review, or an additional level of grant review at NIH by Trump specific political appointees. And, I think we've covered that. Again, there's a lot of news going on, so I forget in how much depth we've covered it. But, some people are saying that it's a little bit concerning that an additional level of potential politicalization can be introduced into a very scientifically rigorous process. On that note, and again, this is sort of like things are all happening at the same time-ish, but Bhattacharya said that one of his new priorities, which he laid out some of them in his remarks, and then he spoke to some of them in response to the questions that were asked. So in his prepared remarks for the NCAB, Bhattacharya actually talked about a new unified grant funding policy. I haven't seen this reported before. I'm not sure if this was the first time he ever spoke about this. I'll have to double check moving forward, but basically, it would move NIH on the whole away from a pay-line-based funding model. He did say that about half of the institutes and centers already do this, but he basically said that NCI is going to have to introduce a new variable when considering which grants to give funding to, which grant applications. Basically, he said, quote, pay lines are no longer the primary driver of funding decisions. And it asks NCI to introduce basically the variable is how well a grant aligns, quote unquote, aligns with the strategic vision of the institute. So it introduces a less scientific, objective metric into the grant review process. We'll have to keep a close eye on that, but basically it allows NCI, or it's institute and center directors, but NCI director, of which we do not have one, to make these grant decisions, or supersede these grant decisions that are based entirely on scientific merit, and add in this again alignment with NIH's priorities, research priorities.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, to me, it was interesting to see on the NCAB side, Doug Lowy's comments. To me, the headline is what's going to happen to grants as next year as NCI transitions to a new system. Yeah. Where they fund grants for their entirety as opposed to. So what does it do to the pay line? Not that pay line is any longer a pay line.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, so I mean, we reported a couple weeks ago that NCI published their sort of funding policy document, and that said that the pay line will be up to the 4th percentile, which is a historic low. We've covered that in the past. But this, what Paul, you're referencing, is this upfront funding or forward funding, multi-year funding. There's a couple different words for it. But basically, the Trump administration is asking NCI and other NIH institutes and centers to give grants their entire funding upfront, rather than basically spreading it out over 4 or 5 years. And so, if you have this RPG, research project grant pool of money, and you're used to spending, I think, what was it? It was I forget exactly the numbers, but a certain amount of it is I think it might be, what is it? It's like 80% or something, Paul. A huge chunk of it, right? A huge chunk, I think it would be more than half, is dedicated to paying off previous year's grants.
About 80, yeah. The mortgage.
Yeah, the mortgage is I heard that for the first time last week when you said that. And so, when you're expecting to, use this 20% to fund new grants, but then you're also having 80% or whatever the percentages are, but, this huge chunk going to last year's and the previous year's multiple grants. And then the Trump administration comes in June and says, actually, every new grant you give out, or I think it's 50% at this point, but ultimately every new grant you give out has to be given out entirely up front. That drastically reduces the number of new grants you can give out, of course, because there's limited money. Larger payment of grants means lower number of grants. It's so basically he said, and we did some digging. There's a little bit of like specifics being a little bit in the weeds, but Lowy did say that through this process, specifically with R01 and I believe it's R37 grants, they expected to give out 700 awards in 2025, but after this new policy basically came down, and they are required to do 50% of their new grants to be full upfront funded, they're only going to be able to give out 400 of these grants. So it's nearly halving. It's nearly halving.
Halving is it's a dessert. It's a halva.
Halva, yeah, that's where I thought you were going, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, this is not a dessert. This is something else.
The opposite. Bitter pill instead. But so yeah, it's not good. So basically, I mean, I think the interesting part of all of this is that, even if Congress says funding stays flat, indirect costs are fine as they are. There's no cap on indirect costs. The Trump administration's actions still have fiscal impact on the institute that can hurt researchers. And so I think it's important to just sort of scale back a little bit sometimes when we're covering, like spending bills and stuff like that. It's like, there's other stuff going on that is, negatively impacting the field.
Well, thank you. This is an amazing summary.
Yeah, it might be one of our longer podcasts, but there's a lot to say, so we got to get it done.
Yep. I guess the moral of the story, we should never take a publication break anymore and just keep working around the clock all the time.
Yeah, the whole year. We can't take the what is it? The congressional recess.
Yes, we cannot. No recesses, just work.
Thanks, Donald Trump.
Yeah. Hey, thank you. So also this week, we had a fantastic guest editorial by Dr. Paul Thurman of Columbia. Dr. Thurman is a professor of management and health management. And he looked at the priorities that this country has been exhibiting in spending more on ICE than on cancer research, and kind of taking a more of a historical view of it. And Dr. Thurman, how did you come up with this idea of doing this calculation?
Well, first of all, Paul and the rest of the Cancer Letter team, thank you for having me on. It's a delight to be part of the conversation. I appreciate you mentioning the editorial. I got interested in this, having some conversations actually with some colleagues of mine, both here at Columbia and at the National Cancer Institute, where I do a bit of teaching to their research fellows. And when the articles started coming out with the numbers around what parts of the big, beautiful bill would be spent on immigration or on border enforcement, we simply asked the question, hey, how much are we spending on cancer research? And how much are we spending on the NIH in general? And what are those orders of magnitude? And it turned out that not all of us knew any of the numbers, like what was the ICE and border number, what was the NIH or the NCI numbers. So I did a little bit of digging and discovered that there's a lot of money that's being set aside for ICE and for border enforcement, and actually a potential decrease from an already small number for the National Cancer Institute for cancer research.
So when you look at the numbers, cumulative numbers of of spending on NCI from 1971, which is 72 really is what we should look at on. But these are small numbers in 71. So and compare it to what's in store for ICE. How does I love those numbers. That was the thing that jumped out at me in that piece you wrote.
Well, and thank you. Not only did they jump out at me, just the fact that one of them has an extra digit or two than the other, and that
Right.
they are so different, is what sort of urged me to write the editorial. If we go all the way back to President Nixon, which not my first memories of television were the Watergate trials, just as a side note. But if we go all the way back to when he declared war on cancer in 71, and then the appropriations were made in 72, that's when the head of the National Cancer Institute became a presidential appointee, just like the head of the National Institutes of Health. If you look at how much money's been spent in those 54 years since the NCI was founded, since the war on cancer was started, perhaps they should have called it the Department of War on Cancer back then or something.
Nice.
But if you look at the numbers, we've in nominal terms. So if you just add up the dollars without accounting for inflation, you get to about $180 billion that have been spent on the National Cancer Institute. If you adjust that for inflation since the early 70s, you get to about $322 billion in real terms. So inflation adjusted numbers, $322 billion over 54 years. Now, if you compare and contrast that to some of the ICE numbers and border protection numbers that have come out, the big beautiful bill, the big reconciliation package that was just passed by both houses of Congress, ICE and border protection, and these numbers are coming from the New York Times and the Cato Institute and other sources. The annual ICE budget in today's dollars will increase from about $8 billion to $28 billion. So a $20 billion increase. That's in an annual budget, by the way. That's 1 year. And the government will also create over a 5-year period an additional infusion of roughly a total of, I believe, 170 billion. So you get 28 billion a year, and you get a sort of a kicker over 5 years of 168 billion. So if you do the math on that in current dollars, remember, total over 54 years for the NCI is about what I said before in terms adjusted for inflation, 322 billion. Now compare that to 168 billion one time and 28 billion a year. In just a few years, ICE and border protection will have been appropriated as much money in just a few years as the National Cancer Institute has had in its entire history. Mm-hmm. So, and that's okay. We've spent certainly a lot of money on defense, and we've spent money on other priorities, but let's think about the real impact of that investment. And that's where things start to get very interesting. You can trace just about any drug, particularly a cancer drug, back to some National Cancer Institute funding, whether it was research that was funded at the NCI itself or funded extramurally to a university like Columbia, the NCI giving us grants to do drug development and clinical research and clinical trials. So if you look over those 54 years, there's been, a bit more than 100 anti-cancer drugs developed, all with explicit ties back to that $322 billion over 54 years. Okay. And by the way, those drugs have saved a lot of lives. They've extended the life. We've actually cured some cancers. We don't have germ cell or testicular cancer really anymore, if you think about the Lance Armstrong cancer. A lot of childhood leukemias we don't worry about. Hodgkin's lymphoma has pretty much been eradicated. So there's been a lot of cures and certainly quality of life extensions thanks to those medications. On the other hand, that's the improvements. But now look at the costs in terms of lives. If you let's excuse the dollars for a moment. Let's just look at lives. The number of lives that have been saved by cancer medications and by the research that the NCI has done, we've roughly cut the death rate of cancer by 34% over that time period. So that's a lot of lives saved. Now, just to be clear, there's still a lot of people affected by cancer. Even since that war began, about 27 million lives have been lost to cancer in those 54 years. And every year, about 600,000 people die. That's cancer. And cancer being very broad, all forms of cancer. Cancer is going to affect 1 in 3 Americans in their lifetimes. And that doesn't even include the families that are affected by those deaths or by that disease. I'm sure all of us know somebody, either a personal friend, an acquaintance, a family member that's been affected by cancer in some way. All right. So that's sort of the battle we're fighting, the true war that we're fighting, and some sense of the casualty rate. Let's compare that now to something that is similarly funded in a fraction of the time, ICE and border protection. If we go with the hypothesis that there's a lot of criminals and a lot of murders and a lot of crime that's being committed by illegal immigrants that we want to now remove from the country, that number is statistically insignificant. Hey, no, we don't want anybody to die in anyone's hands. Okay, and I'm not here to say that this is necessarily an either or argument. Namely, we should fund cancer and not fund border protection. We want strong borders and we want protection and we want people to be in the country legally. But if you look at the, in business terms, the return on investment with far less money, the war on cancer is saving more lives and putting a bigger dent in death, if you will, than other expenditures. Oh, and by the way, just in case you're curious, I told you what the ICE budget is of roughly $28 billion a year with this infusion of another $168 billion. The National Cancer Institute budget for this year is $7.2 billion. Mm-hmm. And under the current proposal by the president and the fiscal budget for 2026, that number will reduce by 37%. So
that won't happen, because I hope won't happen, but might. Who knows?
Right.
We don't know, but it's unlikely to happen if Republicans in Congress have their way.
Right. And I think, and again, I'm not here to say I'm certainly pro-cancer treatment and pro-cancer research. I'm also pro-immigration, but let's look at sort of the morality and the prioritization of these things. As I say in my editorial, I think, the way a government or the way a people spends its money talks not only about its priorities, but about its morality. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that perhaps we're losing a bit of our moral compass by appropriating in this disproportionate way towards something that does not cause nearly the death and destruction and psychological damage that a disease does. And when you start, reducing the number of cancer researchers that can be hired. By the way, to that point, ICE is expanding its ranks to 14,000 employees. The National Cancer Institute right now has about 4,000 employees, probably fewer because that number does not yet account for the Department of Government Efficiency cuts. So you're talking about 4,000 cancer researchers and 14,000 ICE employees. What problem are we really trying to solve here, and which one is going to have a bigger impact on, quite frankly, the health of the United States
and the world? But it's also interesting that if you were to take the budgets of the predecessors of ICE, all of the preceding agencies, this would be a Herculean task, and add that up from 1971 up, you would have an even stronger case. But we're
that's right,
doing a little impressionistic numbers, and you still get the argument. And I don't think anyone is suggesting that borders should not be guarded and
agreed. We want strong immigration reform and policies that you're welcome to be in the country as long as you're here illegally. As long as you're here legally, excuse me.
Yes.
You're not here illegally is what I meant to say.
Right.
But we also want to be able to protect you from a disease that affects 1 in 3 of us. It's interesting. There are 3 of us right now on these panels.
Yeah.
Anybody want to flip a coin?
No.
And we all know each other. So now we will know someone, right? So it's what is the real moral priority, and perhaps the economic priority, and I think strengthening one part is fine, but strengthening one part at the expense of potentially allowing a disease to spread more. And this is not without precedent. We've seen measles outbreaks. We have the state of Florida that wishes to perhaps have its own vaccine policy, and other states that are perhaps developing their own policies. So, if you start to run numbers and play games like that, uh, we would hope that no matter how we want to make our populace healthy, whether it's through reducing crime or reducing the incidence of cancer, we should support that. I think I think that there's a proportional way to do that, and I would question some of our priorities and our spending habits. I'm not sure if it were my checkbook, I'd be writing checks like this.
Right, right. That's a very interesting argument. Very, it just seeing it all together was to me was, that's brilliant. So there we are. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for writing the piece. And please write more.
My pleasure. Thank you. And
Thank you.
looking forward to collaborating more with you, not only as a professor and sort of thinker about this stuff, but also institutionally. We at Columbia are delighted to be part of the family, and we'd like to be more so moving forward. So we'll keep that
Oh,
going.
yes, that would be fantastic. Thank you.